Thank you very much. I'm Bill Schilling, President of the Wyoming Business Alliance. The Business Alliance and the Wyoming Heritage Foundation are honored to be able to be involved in organizing this event tonight. As you know, this is our 30th annual forum that begins tomorrow. As we started work in terms of the planning for the event, one of the thoughts that we had was that we might want to call upon the wisdom and good graces of some individuals who have been so much a part of Wyoming's recent past, present, and the future. We want to give a special thanks to Chesapeake Oil and Chesapeake Energy for their principal sponsorship for tonight's event. I want to give, That's from Dave Bell, a very dear friend and also my chairman. We also want to give special thanks to Jim Nielsen, who's a past chair of the Business Alliance and will be speaking tomorrow, because Senator Simpson and Governor Sullivan came to Cheyenne by way of a rather circuitous way. They left with Jim Nielsen, thanks to Jim and one of his aviation company's planes. So they went from Cody to Billings, which is not exactly a direct route to Cheyenne. And because those of us who have been involved with distinguished governors and senators know that there's time and then there's the governor and the senator's time. So it left Billings then and came to Cheyenne. Perfect time, you know, because they were both able to have live interviews tonight on a local TV station. They're here now. Then they get back in the plane and they go to Denver to deliver the good senator who's going on to the east tomorrow. And then the plane takes Governor Sullivan back to Billings. And then the plane goes to Cody after that. At least I think that's the plan. Now, I do think, Jim, also that the plane then comes back to get you on Friday. Is that correct? You're hoping so. Okay, good. So we're particularly pleased to have Bob Price as our moderator and MC for tonight's event with Town Square Media. Bob did a great job, as I think many of you remember, last year in interviewing Herb Allen, who has a ranch outside of Cody and did a great presentation for us. So with that, please welcome our panel, and please welcome Bob Price as our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. In about 1982, this particular forum was a half day. In the middle 1990s, of course, it went, as most of you know, to 2 days with a number of very important national figures and personalities under the guidance of Bill Schilling. On this 30th anniversary, please give him a big round of applause for him. Tonight's format, ladies and gentlemen, is very informal. Think of me as your Oprah Winfrey, if you will. Yes. Governor Mike and also Al Simpson might have some opening comments, as I understand. And we can do that right now. Is that okay with you, Senator?
Well, I think that would be perfectly appropriate.
All right.
Yes, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Al Simpson, in case you didn't see it.
It's wonderful to hear your golden voice again.
Thank you.
You're androgynous. That's a fish that goes into salt water or the fresh. Because you've done Sullivan's stuff and you've done mine.
That's exactly right.
The Mead's too. Did you just? I mean, it's really appalling.
Whoever paid top dollar, remember? That's right.
Not from my campaign, but anyway, it's a treat. And Mike and I worked like dogs on this while flying around, but. Thanks to my friend Jim Nielsen, class of '49, Cody High School. We've known each other since 6 years old. and he's a very dear friend.
Hi-yo.
And to Bill Schilling, who is able and spirited and efficient and persistent. Thank you for this. And Sullivan told all my jokes on one of these occasions before, and it was appalling, and I'm glad I could go first. But I have a new one. The word politics, very timely, comes from the Greek word. You know, they gave us democracy, so politics, poly meaning many, ticks meaning blood-sucking insects. And so there's a new one for you, Sullivan.
There are no new ones from you.
Wait a minute, we were given 5 minutes here. I won't do that. It was a rare treat to do this years ago. This started the year I was elected, 78, and I think I came, Harry Roberts was running the shop, and it was a great thing, and it still is, and then Erskine and I came back a few years ago. But the pleasure of Wyoming was serving with, you know, tremendous people. Giants, both parties, Herschler, Wallop, Sullivan, Cheney, Thomas, Geringer, Cuban, they all, you know, all of us together, always doing something for the state. And I was elected with Dick Cheney when Ed was governor, and there are many successes to relate and a few vivid failures, but we always worked for the same goal, and that was work for Wyoming, make it work. And we didn't get into social issues or how did you feel about abortion or gays or lesbians. Those were private things.
Hi-yo.
And none of them on that list ever agreed with me on that. Just wanted to throw that in too. Now anyway, I got 4 more minutes. Friendship is actually what makes it work. Respect, integrity, loyalty, honesty, those are good traits. They're not corny. Mike and Jane and Ann and I have shared much together, as well as Jim and his dear wife Ann. And we worked on many things. Kern River, Mike was heavy on that. Underground easements with the Trona industry, that's another story. This guy, Mike Sullivan, is a warm, wise, and witty guy, and I know that, with a powerful drive and energy that he has used not only as governor, but as ambassador to Ireland. He has special gifts. Just a second, don't pick that up. Well, it's 2 more minutes.
Don't stop now,
No,
Al.
no. But you ran against my brother, you bastard. So, we'll get this back on track. You know. Just a few more notes here. Cheney and Wallop and I were the Wyoming delegation for 10 years. And once every couple of weeks, we called Ed Herschler to say, what can we do for you or what can you do for us? Same with Mike. When he came on, how are we doing? What can we do for you? Can we do anything? Contact, tough issues, and we use compromise. Today, the sadness is that the word compromise means wimp. And I can tell you, if you can't learn to compromise an issue without compromising yourself, you sure as hell don't want to be in a legislature and you don't want to get married. I think that takes care of that. And finally, no, wait, I had something on the back of that, but it's 1 more minute. But we worked hard, played hard. This is page 4 of the 5. But the worst one of all, Mike and I, we went to the Holiday Bowl together with Jane and Mike. And it was the most miserable game. It was Oklahoma State and Barry Sanders. And the score was 63-13 or something. It was cold, and there weren't many Wyoming fans left. So one of us, I can't remember, said, "Let's get the hell out of here." We rose, and a little knot of well-oiled Polk fans looked up and said, the rats are sinking, the rats are leaving the ship, the rats." And we sat back down and suffered through the whole damn thing. And I wanted to share that with you. And anyway, enough of that. I think we can just say it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with Mike and Matt. And his grandfather, Cliff, got me started in politics. He resigned an hour early, and Herschler appointed me to the U.S. Senate. Instead of being number 100, I was number 88. And it gave me a whole seniority position I never would have had without Cliff. And I think you're doing a great job.
Hi-yo.
So, that's it. I give up.
Before we move to Governor Sullivan, Al, the Congress has become, as you well know, impossibly gridlocked and very politically polarized. Is that a problem here in Wyoming? But there's a second question for you. You three seem to be just the opposite. Good friends, despite your partisan differences. Why is that quality in such short supply, do you think?
We know each other. You now know these people come on Tuesday and work till Thursday. They have no idea who the other people are. Their staff is telling them to go to this room off the campus and start raising money.
Right.
Get on the Rolodex, and now you have anonymous. The Supreme Court decision on funding is a disaster, and the anonymous money coming in. And that's it. They don't know each other. There's no sitting down to dinner. I remember my dad and Ev Dirksen and the Senate would sit and have dinner together. And Humphrey came to Wyoming when I was in the legislature, Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, because Dad asked him to come by because I was in the legislature. And here he came. He's a wonderful guy, interesting guy. It's friendship. It's loyalty. But most of all, it's just getting to know each other, and they have no idea who they are. If they didn't have that button, they wouldn't even know who was who in their own body.
John Barrasso was very proud, ladies and gentlemen, to get 76% of the vote, which did not beat Al Simpson's second round at 78%.
It kept dropping.
Governor Mike Sullivan, please.
Well, thank you all very much for being here, and congratulations to the Business Alliance or the Heritage Society, whatever it is now. I've lost track. For 30 years, I've had a love-hate relationship with this outfit for 20 of those years or 25 of those years, but I'm really proud to be here and pleased with what the Business Alliance has done over the years. Even we've associated from time to time in doing that. Congratulations to Bill Schilling for hanging in all those years, and to you for hanging in with him. But it has been a remarkable time, and I could recite the accomplishments, but I don't need to. But I would say that I think Leadership Wyoming is certainly one of the really great things that has happened to this state to bring it closer together at a younger level. And the only thing that has bothered me is he teaching them all to be Republicans, for God's sake. But I was frankly concerned when we started here that I was going to be first, and then we'd hear from Al, and then I forgot that he never saw a microphone that he didn't covet. So I really had no worry. I agree with most of the comments that Al has made about why it is that politics in Wyoming are different. I ran 2 gubernatorial campaigns during my political time, one against Al's brother, one against Governor Mead's mother. and the point is that we finished both of those campaigns. We started as friends. We finished the campaigns as better friends than we started. And that is the nature of Wyoming. Now, I got into politics not having been in politics before, so the most surprised person on election day was me. And there were a lot of others as well, but I was the most surprised. I had a steep learning curve. The first, one of the things that I remember most vividly was walking into the governor's office after leaving the inaugural reception in the Capitol, and the desk was absolutely clean with one exception. There was a piece of paper on it, a letter, that I looked at. I didn't have much time, but I looked at it, and it said, "Dear Governor, welcome to the office. X," and I don't remember the name now, "has been sentenced to death. And unless an appeal is filed in 5 days, you will be the first governor to preside over a death penalty in the state of Wyoming in the last 20 years." And I thought, holy mackerel, what have I done to myself? As it turned out, that didn't happen. But one did happen. The Mark Hopkinson case happened later, and it was the first in 24 years. It's a tough office, Governor. I'm glad it's yours. But you may remember that during that time, we had a combination of issues. One was the oil and gas and mineral market had fallen out of the ceiling, and agriculture was in the pits. And we searched for every coffee can that the state of Wyoming had, and we found some. But my most vivid memory was when we balanced the budget on the basis of a lady none of us knew who died in Jackson and left $20 million in estate taxes. And if she hadn't kicked the bucket, we'd have been in real trouble. One other lesson that I learned early was we were in the midst of an agricultural crisis as well as a mineral crisis, as I mentioned. And we were the State Farm Loan Board, who was meeting on a monthly basis to foreclose on farm and ranch loans. We didn't want to do it. We didn't have any choice. But that was our job. And almost invariably, the people would come to the meetings to try to provide some reason why we wouldn't foreclose on their loans. And of course, they were wonderfully emotional reasons, but there wasn't any choice. And what I learned at that point is that if you let people tell their story and you listen to them, they'll accept bad news if you tell them the truth. But if you just make a decision without listening to anybody, it has no credibility. And we were talking at the dinner table. The truth. People are smarter than politicians give them credit for. And if the politicians would just understand that the people will understand if they'll tell them the truth, then we would be able, as Al said, to compromise. It wouldn't be a four-letter word, because that's the nature of democracy. But somehow, so in order to try to maintain my 5 minutes, I'm just going to mention a couple of other things. In 1990, Wyoming was the only state in the Union to have lost population. And to show how times have changed, I was going off over the Christmas vacation to duck hunt or goose hunt with my son. And Denny Curran, who was my press secretary, came to me and said, one of the national radio stations wants to interview you about the fact that Wyoming's the only state that's lost population. And I said, that's fine. When do they want to do it? He said, Wednesday. I said, can't do it Wednesday. I'm going goose hunting. He said, well, Governor, you know that new cell phone you just got? You could probably do the interview from the goose blind. I said, well, if it works, I'll try it. I didn't know whether it would work or not. But I was actually going into Colorado by the brewery between here and Fort Collins to goose hunt. So I was in the blind, and we'd set it up for a certain time, and the phone rang, and it was Christian Science Monitor Radio or whatever it was, saying we'd like to interview. I said, okay, I'm ready. Fire off. And they said, well, talk about this. And well, I said we were in the middle of a boom when we started the 80s, and then things kind of went wrong. And we got about 3 minutes into the interview, and some geese flew in. And I said, you're going to have to hang on for a minute. I've got a goose flying in. Put the phone down, and we took a couple shots. I think we took 3 shots, got 1 goose. That's typical of my hunting experiences. And I picked it back up, and the guy said, you really are in a goose blind. And I said, yeah, I'm in southeastern Wyoming somewhere. So sometimes, you know, you have to edge the truth just a bit. So all of those, we've all learned lessons in politics. I wanted to bring what they call what do they call that thing? Pound a peg. Does anybody know what I mean when I say pound? Shilling, you ought to know, for God's sake. Well, it's one of those little wooden things that kids have when they pound, and then you turn it over and they pound again. Yeah. Well, let me just say, in 1992, in one of my difficult times, more difficult than others, when I was trying to raise some taxes so we'd have enough money to get through the year, Schilling and his folks you'll see it in the timeline if he gives you a timeline of this, public ad and TV campaign. And this campaign, they used one of those pound-a-pegs. And every time they mentioned what taxes I was trying to raise, they'd pound a peg. And the only thing I could assume was that was me they were pounding. And they did. And we did have a reception, as I recall, at the governor's residence, where I put one of those in a hangman's noose over the entry as everybody came in. But Al would be the classic, quintessential example of this. If you can't tell the truth and you don't have humor, you're not going to survive. You shouldn't survive in politics.
Hi-oh. Before we go to the good governor, Al and Mike, like many of the red states, things have become more conservative. Do you think either of you could get elected today?
I can tell you without question that if I had to go before the 63-member Central Committee of the state Republican Party, they wouldn't put me on the ballot. Because I believe that abortion is a terrible thing. Let's all admit that. I don't see anybody running around with a sign that says, have one of these. But it's a deeply intimate and personal decision. And I don't think men legislators should even vote on it. Now that'll get you in a lot of trouble. We all have somebody we know who's gay or lesbian. What is that about? I had a cousin who won the Silver Star in World War II who was gay. We all know someone who's gay or lesbian that we care about or love. What is that about? That's it. They wouldn't have any part of me right now, but I could win I could get out in the state and I'd win because I worked my ass off. That's all.
So that's a yes, ladies and gentlemen. Mike, could you be elected today, do you think?
Well, I don't have, as a Democrat, yeah, I think I probably could. When I got elected, there were 7 Republicans running and they couldn't find a Democrat. And I raised my hand thinking that I needed a good sabbatical. I was tired of taking depositions. And that if I spent 6 months and didn't put my foot in my mouth, I could go back and practice law for the rest of my life like I thought I was supposed to. And, you know, I got elected and had to figure out what I was going to do then. But it's the best thing that happened to me in my life. And you could probably, because there would be so few alternatives. But the problem with both sides is that the extremes are running the bus.
Governor Mead, I don't want to preempt your opening comments, but like Al, you come from a political family. Your grandfather was also a governor and a United States senator. And I'm sure, I'm positive he was an inspiration. Were there any lessons or tips that he gave to you?
Well, yeah, there was lots of lessons and lots of tips. Most of them had to do with how you herd cattle. I don't know that he ever saw me in politics. But it's remarkable because, you know, growing up, I had so many opportunities for wonderful lessons. I remember Al coming over to the house, Granddad and Grammy's, and we'd have dinner, and we'd get to hear his story. Many stories, many stories. And the senator is quite colorful, as we know, but in the presence of my grandmother, he was not quite as colorful, usually. But, you know, it's a remarkable thing, and both of them mention it. And, you know, in my office, I have 2 pictures that, amongst others, but these 2 that I have there for a number of reasons. One is it's a picture when I was just in street clothes, but Governor Sullivan was in the picture, and Governor Hathaway, and Governor Geringer, and my grandfather, and it was a picture of former governors. And it reminds me of just what they're talking about in Wyoming. Whether we want to or not, we do know each other. And we know that the person you're running against today, you know, may be proposing to your daughter in 5 years. And you got to keep that in mind. And I'll go a step further. Let's think, you know, I ran against Senator Simpson's son. And I will tell you, one of the first phone calls, if not the first phone call I got on election night, was from Colin Simpson. And then next morning, Al and Ann woke me up and congratulated me. And that's the kind of thing that is done in Wyoming. And I'd also remark, you know, after my mom lost to Governor Sullivan, you know, as can happen, you have people who second guess how you run a campaign, and the Republicans were after my mom. And the guy that came to her defense, the strongest defense, was Governor Sullivan. And so I have learned lessons, certainly from my family, but I certainly have learned lessons from these 2 individuals and many other individuals who've been great role models for me in terms of what I do. The other picture I have in my office is a picture of Governor Sullivan and my mom dancing together while they were campaigning against each other. And it gets a little weird, really.
Bravo.
But I observed in that picture that I've got, Governor, is looks like my mom's doing all the dancing and you're standing. So it reminded me, to be governor, you don't actually have to know how to dance, which is a good thing. But it's an honor to be up here with these 2 individuals, and it's an honor to be here in front of this group to celebrate 30 years of tremendous success. Bill Schilling is persistent. He originally said, hey, can you give a few minutes of closing at this? And I said, sure. And then he said, can you sit up there with him? And I said, well, I'll sit down here. So I want to give these gentlemen the time to answer your questions, and I'll do a closing. I just wanted to say, It's a great privilege to be up here with these guys.
Thank you. God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Hansen used to say that his best political advisor was Martha. I'd like to ask you all, and I'd like you to be honest, I know you would be, for some examples of where your wives gave you advice that bailed your ass out of trouble.
Well, that happened. That did happen. But Martha and my mother, Lorna Simpson, were very much alike. They lived with two earthy, wonderful guys who loved wild tales and stories and a little whiskey. And they were beautiful and civil and genteel, and no one I know was more like my mother than Martha Hansen. And Mike's mother, Margaret, same kind of person. Knew them, heard his pa. But when I got tangled up with Anita Hill and Robert Bork, and I'm telling you, I went from the A list to the Z list in Washington. Hey, Simpson, you rotten picking on that poor professor. I said, well, I didn't pick on her. Specter was picking on her. I was just sitting there. And Hatch was picking on her. Well, anyway, it didn't work. I didn't. And then with Bork, I asked him the horrible question. I said, what would you do? How do you consider your role if you got on the Supreme Court? And he said it would be a feast, some kind of a legislative feast. Well, that didn't help me. But anyway, I'm going out the door, and I've got my foot in my mouth all over the city. And Ann stopped me, and she said, I'll come back here just a second. I said, look, I have to get out of here. I've got a meeting. And she said, just come back here. Come back. Stand right there. I mean, I've been married 58 years to this glorious woman. She said living with me was much like a religious experience, a living hell. And she said, I just want you to hear something clearly. I love you. You're great. And people don't know that anymore. Why don't you just shut up? And I said, you have never said that to me in all of life. She said, I'm telling you now, shut up. Just stop. Because you're just digging a deeper hole every time you say something. I heard that. And it's tough on the spouse in politics. I know it really is, because they don't understand the combat of it. Tino Roncalio beat my old man over the head and beat him for governor because Dad was not in favor of capital punishment. Try that one in Wyoming. It helped defeat him. Anyway, Tino whacked him, and then Tino ran against Cliff. And Dad wasn't running again, so the press said, are you a hatchet man for Cliff Hansen? He's doing a beautiful campaign, and you're just cutting Tino to bits. He said, a hatchet man? There's nothing I like better than sinking a hatchet into Tino's old bald head. And the old man and Tino, before they died, were best pals, but Mom never got. She said, Millard, how can you do that with Tino? He said, that's the way it works. Anyway, that is the way it works. But yeah, if you don't have a supportive spouse in this game, and Carol will know that out there, and Jane knows it, anybody knows it, you're going to fail. You'll fail. You can't possibly make it, or else you'll end up with a dysfunctional family. Mm.
Jane gave you some good advice at times, I'm sure.
You know Jane.
Yeah.
I would agree with Al, and I don't have quite the dramatic areas of mistake that Al has made that allowed his wife to give him very direct advice. But I think I go back to another one of his stories. Anybody knows in Wyoming, if you're going to be a successful politician, the first prerequisite is you have to have married up. And we all did. And the role that the spouse plays, in addition to the wonderful things that they individually end up doing because they're passionate about Wyoming just as we are, and about things that can help people in Wyoming, but particularly children. And Carol, I commend you for the efforts that you've made already. But what spouses do is maintain your reality. And if you don't have someone to tell you the truth and say, you know, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you consider, you're in real trouble. And I don't know how you would do it if you didn't have that kind of support and advice and criticism. From time to time, people have suggested, usually when Al's publishing a book, that I ought to write a book. And I don't think I'll ever write a book, but I did adopt a title for a book. And I think it answers your question. And the title would be, That's All Well and Good. Just don't forget out the garbage.
Governor Mead, words of advice from your beautiful bride.
The best thing to do is have her come up. It's ongoing, actually, and probably get some tonight as well. You know, it's just so we don't forget, these two are sort of out of the game. I'm in the game, so I'll be a little more. I'm not going to reveal all my mistakes yet. You know, it was a remarkable thing, and there's a number of instances, but when we were campaigning, you know, having not done it before, we were floundering around, and we had some guy who was supposedly an expert on which households to do and where to go and which doors to knock on. And Carol came in the office in about 2 days, got us all lined out and said, just go out there, just start working. And she let us, and there's just a number of examples of where, without her sort of practical sense, we would have headed in another direction. And then, you know, the other thing, a bit of advice, I don't know what to do about this, but I know that, you know, as she goes out and works on kids' issues, and she's very passionate about it, you know, I get not necessarily advice from her, but advice from others, which is, why can't you be more like your wife? So.
Wyoming, gentlemen, as you know, is in sound financial shape. That's partly a result of the blessing of our natural resources. But who gets credit for managing those resources over the years? Senator?
Well, I can tell you who gets credit for putting the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund on the ballot. I was in the legislature, and Warren Morton and Tom Strook were both in the oil industry, oil and gas industry, and Warren came to I always stayed in an apartment here because when I wanted food, I just walked through the hitching post. And somebody would say, have you eaten? I'd say, no, I haven't. And then I would eat and drink and smoke cigars and play big shot. You know, they were all doing the same thing, you know. If they didn't have an expense account, they'd have been down at Joe's lunch. Anyway, enough of that. Where the hell was I? Oh, yes. What was your question, Bob?
Warren Morton and Tom Strook.
Oh, yes. So he came in and he said, you know something? We're in the oil and gas business, but when the oil and gas is gone, they'll be gone. It's very simple. And when the coal is gone, they'll be gone. I said, that sounds very logical. He said, so let's get together and put a constitutional amendment for a severance tax on oil and gas and coal and all and then the non-fossil was Trona. And we strung that together and got Democrats and Republicans alike and put that baby in and got it through the House and the Senate and got it out to the people in Wyoming. And what is there in there? $4.5 billion or something like that. And that, I can tell you, that was one of the greatest pleasures I had to do that. Not that we were fighting the industry or anything, but to see two guys in the business promoting that because they knew that would, but the handling of it is done by the legislature of Wyoming, and they do a good job. It's a conservative legislature. You're chairman of the appropriations committees of both the House and the Senate. The governor himself has said 8% cut, and telling them to do it because they know what to do. you don't just say 8% and step back. Just say to the department, the agencies, you know where the fat is. Quit kidding yourself and cut 8%. They'll do that. Governor's absolutely right. The legislature will do that. We'll always protect ourselves. We still have the issue of the highway money, and you continue to rattle on about that. I hear you talking about it all the time. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's 270 million bucks we're going to need, but they'll do it right. They always do. It's a wonderful group of people.
Governor Mike?
Well, I agree with Al as it relates to Tom and Warren and Stan Hathaway, who worked so hard to get that in. But I'd go a bit back further in history, and you know the Democrats do provide some benefit. Ernest Wilkerson ran against Stan Hathaway, and he's the one that proposed a severance tax. He was much too arrogant to get it through or to win the election, but he planted the idea, and it was a great idea, and it was taken up. And I'd have to credit our mineral resources and the people who produce those mineral resources. They've made us a blessed state. And then you have to credit the people of Wyoming who said, you guys pay the taxes, we don't want to. And you know, to some degree, I would say this, therein lies our problem. We are a bit of an entitlement state, and it isn't necessarily healthy. I'm going to quit there.
Governor Mead?
Well, I'll give you a current perspective. I certainly think I would echo what has been said, and I would also say, you know, the legislature, I think, does a very good job watching after that. You know, our collective savings in all the coffee cans in Wyoming are between $15 and $16 billion. And that's a remarkable thing for a state of 565,000 people. And I bet you can compare that to any other state in terms of population and savings, and we come out way on top. And so for the people in the mineral industry, for the leadership that saw the need for that many years ago, and then for the many legislatures and governors who have made sure that it stays on course, you know, we're all there. It's all credit. I think it's as I look at my budget now, you know, if you did not have that, we would be looking at, you know, Governor Sullivan, I hate to think about wishing a lot of people die, but I mean, there's just no way to we couldn't even begin to balance a budget without the mineral wealth that we've had. So,
the back to your comment about Ernest Wilkerson. Republicans outnumber Democrats in Wyoming about 3-1. Has the Democratic Party ceased to be relevant in running government in Wyoming?
I don't know about relevant, but I'll talk about relevance.
Excuse me, yes.
Let me just say before I answer that question, because I don't really want to answer the question, I want to toss one to Bob, who's the voice, you know, the voice. And he really ought to be the one up here being interviewed because he's worked both sides of the aisle and has been involved in many more campaigns than even Al, and has been really, really important to Wyoming. And I think we're fortunate to have him here and his contribution.
Thank you.
Now, what was your question?
Yeah, what was the question? Yeah, sure.
Well, let me just go back. I don't think it's in my position to say whether the Democratic Party is or should be. You all can see what's before you. But I would hearken back to the early days of the Wyoming legislature when the only Democrat was Thurman Arnold, who went on to Washington to become the greatest trust buster and Justice Department official that had ever hit the Justice Department, but he was the only, as I recall, Democratic legislature in the legislature, and called a caucus one day in the phone booth outside the chambers, announced a caucus. So all I can say is what goes around comes around.
I'm wondering, Al, if your dad would recognize the political landscape in Wyoming and find you today about where it was in the days in the governor's office.
What it was?
Yeah.
My dad's?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dad was a tough guy. He was born in Jackson, like Cliff was. He was captain of the football, basketball, and baseball at the University of Wyoming, all three sports. Tough, prize fighter. Member of the United Mine Workers when he worked over in Red Lodge one summer. And when he was governor, he knew he had the hammer in his hand, and he used it. And it got him in a lot of trouble. And they took it out on him. Joe Hickey, wonderful guy. Win Hickey was a legislator here. I learned my craft because I was in the Democrat-controlled legislature in 1965. The Speaker of the House was Walter Phelan, a Democrat from Cheyenne. And that's where you learn how to legislate. How do you work with the other side? And when you work with the other side, you can get every success you can imagine. Ted Kennedy and I worked on stuff. I don't agree with him, don't live his life, but when we shook hands, that was it. And that's all I ever looked for. I didn't care. I don't judge people's lifestyle or their morals. That's some other judge somewhere. But as a legislator, I'm looking for the guy to legislate with, and he was an extraordinary legislator. And Dale Bumpers, and I worked with presidents, Carter and Bush and Clinton and Reagan, a delight. I've had that privilege. But when Dad refused to change the road, that they were doing the highway through Buffalo and Sheridan, and the government was putting up 93% of the bucks, and they said, we're going to put the interchange in Buffalo. And the people of Sheridan came over and said, you're going to what? Buffalo is a jerkwater place, and Sheridan is the queen of northern Wyoming, and therefore you're going to put it there. He said, look, the government's paying for it. I don't have any say. And they said, you're the governor. You can change it. He said, I can't, and I'm not. And then he wasn't in favor of capital punishment. So I remember I came over, I was in law school, when the Sheridan delegation came in to see him. There were about 10 of them. I can remember their names and their faces. They're all dead now, so I can speak clearly. They sat in the governor's office, and Dad he pulled the curtain back there. There was a curtain back there. And I sat there, and they said, Governor, you still have the opportunity to change that. And if you don't, it could be very difficult in your wife's home county, which was Sheridan. You could even lose. And Dad said, he listened for about 10 minutes. I'm behind that curtain. He said, could you say that a little more clearly? Yes, you would probably be defeated. He said, are you telling me that if I don't change that you guys will defeat me? Well, get your ass out of here and go to work. And man, I tell you, they were furious, and boy, they went to work. But I was so proud of my old man. I thought, that's the way to do the business. And that's what he did. But he was direct. Hathaway was like that. Guts, old bomber pilot, he didn't take a crap off anybody. And Herschler, well, the worst day of Ed's was when they asked him to meet with a Japanese delegation. And he said, I'm not going to meet with a Japanese delegation. They shot me over there in Guadalcanal. I really don't care to see any of them again. They said, but you're the governor now, and you will see them. And he said, well, bring them in. So in they came, the delegation. There was one journalist. You remember this, Mike? You don't want to believe this, but you do. So this guy said, how old are you? And the guy said 63 or whatever. He said, "You're just my age. Were you ever in the service?" "Yeah, I was. I was in the Japanese, 3rd Regiment." He said, "Were you on Guadalcanal or where, Coral Islands?" The guy said, "Yeah." He said, "Were you in so-and-so?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You saw a picture of the guy that shot me." That delegation did not go well. But that was Ed Herschler, and he was the longest serving government in our history. 12 years. He was just what people loved. 2 fingers of red eye at night, and tell stories, smoke Camels 3 packs a day. And I was privileged, as Mike was, to give the eulogy of his service.
Hi-yo.
Since Al didn't answer your question, let me try to do it. The question was whether his dad
You can't talk.
would recognize the governor's office and its issues today. And I would just say, when I hadn't been in office more than 6 weeks, and Al sent me an article that his dad wrote while he was governor, which I carried around in my briefcase for the rest of my 8 years, which outlined the issues that he faced. And to the best of my memory, I'll recite them: education, economic development, mineral development, environmental considerations, and 1 or 2 others. And they weren't a bit different than the issues that I was addressing at that time, nor much different than the issues that Governor Mead is addressing today. It is Wyoming, and the issues have been much the same. I'd have to say the zeros have changed a bit in the budget. But the stresses and the strains are much the same. One other quick anecdote that reflects one of the other lessons I learned from Jim Baker, one of Al's friends who was Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. He said one time that his motto was, never burn any bridges in politics, because you never know when you have to cross back over that bridge. And that's in spades in Wyoming. And the anecdote I want to say is when I was in high school in Douglas, Wyoming, my dad was a lawyer. He had been county attorney, but he was practicing privately at the time. And a young man, 18 years old, came through Manville or Keyline, Wyoming, and went to rob a guy who'd parked his truck next to the road and ended up shooting him, killing him. My dad defended him. My dad lost the trial, lost the appeal, and the young man was sentenced to death. He didn't die, and he ultimately left prison because Al's dad commuted his sentence and then got beat for his position on capital punishment. 30 years later, I had to decide on my position on capital punishment. That certainly informed my view, but it didn't control my view. But the circles in Wyoming are so small and so continuous, just as they are in this room, that we should never forget that we're all in it together.
Salud.
Delivered. And he talked about keeping young people in Wyoming, economic development, minerals, the environment, and diversity of our economy. And I use that speech. I take captions out of it, and it's you change the dates, and it's still relevant today. And there is some people get frustrated on that, but to me there is some amount of comfort in knowing that this is Wyoming, and these are the issues that we need to deal with. And you can reach back in time and see how other governors addressed it, or members of the legislature addressed it. And also, I can call Governor Sullivan, Governor Friedenthal, Governor Geringer, and say, what did you do on this issue? And that's nice to have that level of experience. I mentioned my first comment about the picture that I had of Governor Sullivan and my mom dancing together. One of the other reasons I keep it there is just what Governor Sullivan was saying. It is a close community, and Governor Sullivan, I've reached out to him for advice, and he's given me advice. And that is such a remarkable thing about Wyoming, that connectedness. And the same with Al. You know, anytime you want to call these folks, they've lived through these issues, they're willing to give their help. And even though our families run against each other at different times, to be able to know that they will do that and do it willingly and in good spirit, a wonderful thing. And I think sometimes in Wyoming we think our population is a disadvantage, but our small population is a tremendous advantage because we do know each other, that we do know each other.
One final question. What bothers you most now about what politics in America has become, Senator?
Well, two things, rigidity and hypocrisy. I mean, if you want to be a drunk, horny, draft dodging poop, be one, but don't pretend you're not. I mean, just put the sign up and say, and you'll get a lot more respect that way out of it. But to see some guy who's giving you this marvelous 100% crap, and then, you know, he's doing the other thing, you know, well, they do it. You know, they said, well, I won't get into that. Mike will stop me, but I mean, you can't pretend you're a moral giant when you're diddling your secretary. I mean, that's not my idea of anything. I
thought you weren't going to get into that.
But hypocrisy, yes. The other one, what the hell did I say the other one was? No, I had it there on the tip of my... I said hypocrisy, that was the one. Rigidity. We had people running for president who were about as rigid as a fireplace poker, but without the occasional warmth. Now, and these people are rigid on social issues. Now, you show me 100%er, and I'll show you a person with gas, ulcers, heartburn, and BO. Because 100%ers are seethers. I don't stay with the seethers, I stick with the seekers. And I don't like seethers. Let me tell you, there's a lot of hate in America. And this election, you know, there's still people up in Park County where Romney got 77% of the vote who are still in mourning. They have black draped on their homes. I said, get over it. Forget it. Well, they're not going to forget it. How do we get him out of there? There must be some way. We get the birth certificate. We'll find it yet. We don't know where that is. We'll find it. There's something there, and he fathered a child. Yeah, we'll find that somewhere. I mean, give it up. I stick with the old AA phrase. I could have easily been part of that at one time. If you can't forgive a person, it's like letting them live in your head rent-free. The other one is my mother used humor as the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. And those people who are 100%ers are absolutely humorless. And they think if you use humor that you are a silly, and then you can whip them to death. Because they don't understand anything funny or light or humor. It's just dead serious, 100% principle, you know. And I love to get them, the Constitution, that's it, Simpson, you rotten. I said, the Constitution, isn't that amazing? It took them 3.5 months to do that. And you know what? They had to compromise every day. The Declaration of Independence, go look at the original copy in the Library of Congress. Here, Jefferson drafted it, presented it to these guys, and he wrote in the margin, finally, it's almost like, oh, whatever. Because inalienable. No, we don't like inalienable right. We like, no. Just that's the whole life of America is compromise. So stay away from the 100%ers and rigidity and people who want to impose not only their views upon you, but their religion.
Governor Mike. What bothers you most about American politics today?
I can't improve upon Al's comments, but about.
You will, I know.
Well, I'll leave out the diddling comment, but it is. We've already said it. If you can't compromise, you can't have democracy. I think a couple of other things that have contributed to where we've come, with all due respect, Mr. Price. 24-hour news has ruined the minds of American people. And one that I hadn't thought about, but I think makes some sense. We may have reapportioned ourselves out of democracy by developing districts that only encompass one faith. So a politician only has to appeal to one faith, and they're in there for however long they want. There isn't the need to go take care of an entire constituency because you only have one thrust. And somehow we've moved to those rigid extremes that are, I'm not sure how we get out of it, but discussion, truth, and compromise are certainly part of it.
Hi-oh.
Well, again, I'll talk about the perspective. You know, we're a strongly Republican state, and but even within the Republicans, understand we don't speak with one voice. And I'm reminded of that when I present my budget every year. There's difference of opinion. And whether it's between Republicans and Democrats or within a party, you have to be able to listen and hear people who have different points of view. And for me, that's one of the exciting things about politics is if I think I have a really good idea, I be able to sit across the table from somebody else, present that idea, and let them challenge me, and I will challenge them. And what I don't like, what I see in politics is that sometimes it is difficult, and I'm not very good at it, to speak in sound bites. But some of the issues we have are not black and white. They take some thought, they take some work, and you have to work through that. And you have to have an ability to have an argument or debate about a complex subject without just saying, hey, that's a litmus test, you're over here or you're over here. It just doesn't work. As we work through healthcare issues, or we work through the issue on gas tax, Medicaid expansion, those are not 10-second sound bites. They're complex issues. And what frustrates me as I go through that is we're looking for sound bites. We're looking for that's good or that's bad. And we need that opportunity to have that debate. And if you have the best idea, then let's debate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, are we not blessed by these three gentlemen? Thank you very much. Thank you. Governor, please.